Hey everybody, welcome to Head a Star Wars show. We're on the road this week, but we couldn't not do this show for you guys tonight. So, tonight we're going to be talking about, can the Star Wars saga survive without the Skywalkers? And we're going to do it right now.
You're listening to Head, a Star Wars podcast. Two fans, two generations, all things Star Wars begins now.
All right, hello everybody. I'm Eric Vansel.
And I'm Daryl Sanders.
And we're your hosts for this show. So I was reading the Thrawn books, as everybody probably knows. You know this.
Right.
Anybody that's watched our show for more than a couple of weeks knows that I've been reading Thrawn Ascendancy Chaos Rising. And I finished the book, finally, a couple of days ago, and it was phenomenal. And the second book is going to come out in I don't know, a couple of days or something, or not a couple of days. I think it's next month. But what's interesting to me is it got me thinking, because other than a small cameo by Anakin Skywalker, there are no original trilogy characters. Like, it's all about the Chiss, the Outer Rim, this whole political thing that they're going through. And it got me thinking, can Star Wars survive or thrive without the Skywalkers? So I'm going to give you the opportunity first to tell me what you think, and then I'll tell you what I think, and then anybody watching can chat in and tell me what they think. So what do you think?
Oh man. Can the Star Wars saga survive without the Skywalkers? I believe so. I think if it's done right, I mean, and in a way you kind of have to, if you're going to continue to do more Star Wars things. I mean, you could have just left it at, the prequels and the original trilogy and let that just be it. And everybody would have been fine. And, people probably wouldn't have all this great division in Star Wars right now. However, I think, The Mandalorian has shown us that you can, do, Star Wars without the Skywalkers. Now, granted, I know Luke did pop up at the very end of season 2. However, up until that point, everybody was totally in and invested in the Mandalorian. I think you can do it without the characters. I just think that you have to have, just once again, as we always say, great storytelling. That's always going to be, and that's what made the original trilogy good. Honestly, it was the storytelling. It wasn't necessarily just the fact that they were Skywalkers. It was just the storytelling of the Skywalkers. So just take that same type of care with brand new characters and we'll fall in love with them, just as well. And just don't try to create the original trilogy. That's the big thing. Don't try to do the original trilogy, because you're never going to do it. It was a moment in time. It was encapsulated at that moment between 77 and 83. So between that point, yeah, Star Wars was that thing. It was that moment in time, and we have to move on past that. You have to. But I think you take, or as Yoda would say, you must unlearn what you have learned, and then take that and create new stories within the Star Wars regime, just with different characters.
Well, and I agree. And I think The Mandalorian actually is the perfect example of, even though I know technically, yes, it has Luke at the end, but for the most part, its focus has nothing to do with the Skywalker saga.
True.
And people have argued that, well, you have Ahsoka coming in and all that, but even though she was really, I guess, technically part of that whole thing, still, she's not really... She's almost like loosely connected with them, in my opinion. I know that's kind of a weird thing to say because she was Anakin's Padawan. But at the same time, if you really stop and think about it, she's one of the first characters, too, that have broken beyond the whole confines of the Skywalkers. I mean, you can go basically into her whole backstory. You can basically, if you wanted to, you can do almost like a show or whatever based on the novel that came out, or as what it looks like they're going to do. They're going to go on and actually create a show that focuses strictly on her. So, I mean, I think that those are just a couple of examples. I'll tell you something else too. Here's the thing. You know who actually came around that demonstrated that? And I alluded to it earlier. This guy. That's right. Grand Admiral Thrawn himself. This is definitely one of the most compelling characters that we've had in Star Wars for a long time. And first you had the original Thrawn trilogy, well, what they call the Thrawn trilogy, but actually it was episode 7, 8, and 9 in the old Legends. And then now in new canon, Timothy Zahn actually wrote yet another trilogy of books that focused on him. And now it looks like we're going to get yet another one with this Thrawn ascendancy. And he's been alluded to appearing at some point, either in The Mandalorian or maybe in the Ahsoka series, like you and I have theorized.
Yeah, I mean, you know, there's tons of examples where, you know, you look at, you know, how Star Wars has thrived. I mean, you brought up Thrawn, and, you know, he was heavily popularized, you know, to the mass, you know, public in Rebels, you know, and Rebels was a whole nother thing without, you know, the Skywalkers. So I think that, I mean, yes, technically Anakin / Vader was in Rebels too. However, once again, like you said, it didn't focus on that. You know, you were more invested in, you know, Ezra and Hera and Kanan and that whole a group of people. And I think that, like I said, it just goes back to good storytelling. I think that if you really, like you said, make compelling characters, excuse me, if you make compelling characters, and like I said, everybody doesn't have to be a Vader. You know, Vader stands alone. Okay, great. But then there's other characters who are who could be equally formidable. I mean, like we always mention this, but take Cobra Kai, for example, right? All right, the first movie featured Johnny. You know, that was the big antagonist, right? But then he goes over to, you know, over to Japan, and now he's over there, you know, with, you know, a whole completely different villain. Now you got, you know, Miyagi's, you know, kind of like brother. I forgot what his name. I can't think of it at the moment. Sato. Yeah, right. Yeah, Sato, you know, and, you know, his pupil. And so then you got that, and then you have, you know, other stories that are being told. Now you got, you know, so you have so many different things and so many different stories that you can tell out of one particular saga, if you will. So I just think if you just have compelling stories, it will always work.
Yeah. Now, and Ronaldo brings up a good point too. He says the answer is yes. Stories like Rebels, Mandalorian, Knights of the Old Republic, and some parts of Episode 7 work without the Skywalker bloodline. And that's absolutely true.
Yep.
You know, I realize that the Skywalkers basically anchor the saga, but that's because the saga, at least as it exists, focuses on them.
And let's remember, it started in the middle.
Yeah. Yeah. But even beyond that, though, one of the things that I find really interesting about it is that, so episodes 1 through 3, you can say were really more Anakin driven. And you could say the entire story is about Anakin.
Truly, yeah.
Because even though people would be tempted to say, well, the prequels were about Anakin, the original trilogy was about Luke, if you really think about it, it's about the fall and redemption of Anakin Skywalker. That's essentially what episodes 1 through 9 are about.
Yeah, I mean, even 9, I mean, episode 6 ends with Anakin being redeemed, or you see him kind of finally coming back into being Anakin Skywalker again. So yeah, absolutely. It does have everything to do with Anakin. Yeah.
And I just think that one of the things, and again, the more of these novels that I read that focus on different characters that are a little bit outside have always led me to believe, wow, there's a really interesting story there. Even characters that focus on, I guess, like, I don't want to say secondary characters, but like Tarkin. Remember the Tarkin novel? You read that one, right?
Yep, Tarkin. Yeah, you had that. You also have, you know, look at the shows. I mean, before she got fired, you know, you had Cara Dune, you know, so it's supposed to be kind of the main protagonist in Rangers of the New Republic.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? So like you have a whole thing. We got a whole movie called Rogue Squadron that's going to be released by, you know, I can't think of her name right now, but her last name is, I think it's Patterson.
Are you talking about Patty Jenkins?
Patty Jenkins, that's it. Patty Jenkins, yes. So she's doing, Rogue Squadron. So you have stories that you can tell all throughout the galaxy because, like you said, there's tons of people out there, like bounty hunters, smugglers, you got politicians, you have all these different things that kind of make up the Star Wars universe that you can always tell stories on. Just be creative, but make sure there's really a story there. I think that's the biggest thing. I mean, even like I said, the High Republic right now, great comic book.
Just about to bring up the High Republic.
You know what I'm saying? Like,
just about to say that because that's a perfect example of something. And again, yes, it features Jedi and everything else, but it doesn't really feature the Skywalkers.
It barely features Yoda.
Exactly. I mean, Yoda was introduced. Now, I have to say, finally, Ronaldo can hang with me on this one. I'm close to 100 pages into the High Republic novel, the first one, Light of the Jedi.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, it's fantastic. It's great writing. And the stories are compelling. And it feels like Star Wars. I've always said this. As long as you make something that feels like Star Wars, you're good. But you've said it a million times. Just give us a good story. And above all, and this is what they're doing with the High Republic, which I absolutely love, just plan the thing out.
Right.
Make sure that you have a plan, that you have something in mind before you just start vomiting out a bunch of characters and stories that really are unrelated. And I think that that's part of what happened with the sequel trilogy.
Oh, yeah, sure. I mean, by Rian Johnson's own admission, which we did a story on recently. So, yeah, I completely agree that, yes, you can go away from the Skywalker saga. Now, my question to you, since you sent me the first question.
Oh, here we go. Here it comes. I knew I was waiting.
So
Empire Strikes Back right here.
There it is. So where would you like to see it go?
Oh, man, that's a hard question. But I'm glad you asked. No, basically, that's really what I wanted a lot of the show to be about, too, is the fact that, because really we could have made this a 10-minute show, right? Hey, Can it survive without the Skywalkers? Yes. Here's some examples of how it has. All right, we'll see you guys Friday, right? But I didn't really want to do that because the next logical question would be, okay, we've established the fact that it can definitely survive without the Skywalkers in it, but what do you do with it?
Right.
Now, that's not me being political and evading the question because I know full well, but I think that there's a couple of things that you can do. Something that you and I brought up a long time ago, and our viewers have actually chatted or commented this in on several occasions too. You could basically focus on different eras.
Mm-hmm.
You don't necessarily have to go all in on one era and make that your focus for like the next 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
You can branch off. I actually think what they're doing with The Mandalorian, where they're using that is kind of an anchor show, and then they're seeding out new shows from that. I think it's great because what's happening is by featuring them first in The Mandalorian, you're giving them context. And that context is what brings people in. And once they get invested in the story, then they're more likely to go off and actually watch that show.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm talking about characters that had to be reintroduced. Look, every Star Wars fan knows who Ahsoka Tano is. Mm-hmm. And just about everybody on the planet knows who Boba Fett is.
All right.
However, it was very smart on their part to reintroduce those characters into the new canon through The Mandalorian. In Ahsoka's case, she had been through season 7 of the Clone Wars, but this is her first live action appearance.
Mm-hmm.
And so what you do is you go, great. You get people invested like, ooh, I want to know more about this character. And then, hey, guess what? We're going to do an Ahsoka show. And people are like, really? Wow, okay, that was cool. I like what she did in The Mandalorian. Let me go check that out.
Right.
Another example, Rogue One.
Mm-hmm.
We didn't really mention that when we were talking about examples of
Yeah,
of
but that's
Star Wars stuff. But
very
man,
valid point. Yeah, awesome. I mean, granted, like I say, you do kind of feature a Skywalker a little in Vader, but once again, he's not the focus of it.
yeah, he's really more of a supporting character. Now, it's true that I should mention that we are basically talking about completely stripping him completely from any future stories here, because like I said, Thrawn, that book, Ascendancy, Chaos Rising, which I highly, highly, highly recommend, that could have actually been a failed experiment, because like I said, other than maybe just a small, tiny little cameo, I mean, there was nobody familiar. I mean, it didn't even have Eli, who was kind of a carryover from, well, he was basically the character of Eli in the newer Thrawn trilogy books kind of replaces Paleon from the original Legends versions. But the thing that's interesting, though, is that this is kind of a prequel. This is before the Chiss started interacting too much with the Republic. And it's about, the 9 houses that sort of control, they call it the aristocra, which is kind of the aristocratic, families or whatever that, and Mithron Nuoto, I'll learn how to say his name because of this. Pretty much, he was what I don't even think he's like, what do they call it? So he's like a trial born now, which is basically how you're adopted into the family, and then you become, I think it's like a rank something. But it's really interesting because what it shows you is there's all this depth and stuff that's brand new. Like all this, the Chiss system and all that stuff, that's all brand new in the Star Wars universe.
Yeah. I mean, well, that's what I'm saying. Like, you have things like Thrawn, or, you have different, characters that you can explore. Like one of the things I love like Lost Stars, like if you do something where I would love to see things from different perspectives. So let's say we have what's going on behind the scenes during the Empire Strikes Back. Like I said, what was she doing around that time? Or show those events, kind of have the events going on around maybe say a certain person that's kind of like, okay, well, the Empire just, grab Princess Leia again and whatever the case may be. Like, if you just kind of put us in a place where we know this is taking place during Empire.
Right, almost like it appears on the Holonet or something. So Dark Sage 9117 says, have an interesting question for this panel.
All right.
So we eagerly await your interesting question.
Yes.
It's probably typing it as we speak. But right. Yeah, well, that's what it's all about, man. This is a total discussion. So as we eagerly await this question, I agree. If they did something to where maybe they mentioned some of the original trilogy stuff or whatever, is kind of like a Holonet kind of thing, and just like you said, puts it in context of when the story is, but then it's just some completely different thing, because it's true. It doesn't have to be like in the Outer Rim or something. Although I will say, I think the Outer Rim is probably going to prove to be the future of Star Wars. In fact, I think somebody commented on that on one of our
when you say the future of Star Wars, do you mean movies in the sense of like, okay, instead of doing, or I won't say instead of doing, well, maybe episode 9, 10, 11, and 12, like that will be focusing on the Outer Rim? Or are you saying the future, or just gonna go in a completely different direction as far as not picking up from after episode 9?
If I may butcher a line from the Emperor, feature the Outer Rim, all of them. Like, yes, like everything. Because much like in Galaxy, this is an unexplored area of the universe. I mean, everybody always knew it existed. And technically Tatooine, I guess, is kind of like in the Outer Rim. But, We'll have to see. All right, so we got
Darkseid has graced us with the question.
yes.
I have been hearing rumors in the upcoming Kenobi show, Vader and Kenobi are going to have the rematch of the century. As a Star Wars fan, I am not interested in seeing another actual battle between them because that would destroy me to the whole point of Vader's hunt for the Jedi. My question is, what exactly could they do, or should they do with those two in the effort to please fans?
Oh, we're getting all the hard ones tonight. Well, and it's funny because we brought this up on a couple of shows. In fact, was it a couple of weeks ago? We did a whole, I think it was like 2 weeks ago. We did a whole Obi-Wan show. So if you miss that, you might want to check that out because we do focus on that a lot. But
as a follow-up, Darkseid also says, I have read the legend stuff about this, and as far as I can recall, Vader never found Kenobi during his exile. So why change it now? In fact, they're going to. If in fact they're going to. Yeah, this has been my thing. Like,
yeah, it's a really interesting move. I remember when they were saying that. I remember they said that Hayden Christensen might come back, and there were rumors for a long time, right? But a lot of us just assumed that they were rumors. And then all of a sudden, Kathleen Kennedy comes out and says, oh, yeah, they're going to have the rematch of the century or whatever. And you're kind of like,
Yeah, you kind of wonder what that means. I mean, it could be one of those things of ambiguity. Like, all right, you really don't. I'm putting something out there and I'm kind of giving you like the whole misdirection play.
The J.J. Abrams thing.
Yeah, it's like the tight ends on the left side, so you think the play is going left, but it's really going right, the old counter play. So I just think that sorry for the football analogy.
Yeah, you do know this is like a sci-fi fantasy thing, right?
I know this is not my ESPN show, I know.
Yeah, right. It's like right now anybody watching this is like what?
But no, what I'm saying is that I think that Kathleen Kennedy might prayerfully, she's giving us a whole like misdirection thing with her words. I agree with you that I think that it kind of tarnishes the whole meeting in episode 4. I know Eric and others have said, like, well, when Vader utters the line, you should not have come back. That kind of gives the implication that they've met prior to. Well,
all right. Now wait a second. Before you say all that, yes, I said that, but I wasn't talking about this is something that I really wanted or think is even necessary. I'm just saying that there's some ambiguity.
Mm-hmm.
Because we even said, like, a lot of people like to point to the line, he's more machine now than man. It's like, well, he sees there's this guy named Darth Vader. I'm sure Darth Vader's popped up on the holonet a time or two. Mm-hmm. And Obi-Wan's aware of his presence. And Obi-Wan knows full well, as you pointed out, when he saw the
recording.
The recordings, that he was dubbed Darth Vader. So he knows that Darth Vader is Anakin Skywalker, and he looks at him and goes, yeah, he's clearly more machine now than man. That doesn't mean that they met after the Mustafar battle.
Right.
It just means that he has eyes and he can see.
Mm-hmm.
But that said, do I really want there to be a rematch between them? No. It would be cool if they were like in the same, almost like the same area, but we're unaware of each other. That would be kind of cool.
Yeah, I mean, and once again, somebody also pointed out that whole line where Vader says in episode 4, I sense something, a presence I haven't felt since. And then he does that. He whispers.
Yeah, well, that could have been. And that could have
been Mustafar, or that could have been something else. Like I said, because Obi-Wan was, kind of creeping around doing some stuff, and maybe he sensed Obi-Wan's presence then.
Well, the other thing that people point to also is episode 6, right? Return of the Jedi, when he was like, Obi-Wan once thought as you do.
Mm-hmm.
About turning and stuff. It's like, well, if you really watch Revenge of the Sith, though, clearly Obi-Wan was pleading with him to come back to the light and all that other stuff. And I honestly think that when Lucas originally wrote that for Revenge of the Sith, he was, or for Return of the Jedi, he was actually referencing the Revenge of the Sith conversation.
Correct. Yeah, I believe that as well. So it's my hope that they don't honestly meet. Because then it would, like I said, it would kind of tarnish because I feel like this. If you have a younger Obi-Wan and you have a newfound Vader in his suit, that Obi-Wan should be able to vanquish Vader.
Yeah.
In my opinion.
Oh, yeah, especially if it's early. Well, but keep in mind, though, this is taking place 10 years later.
Yeah.
So this is in the middle. So Vader's pretty formidable at this point.
Pretty formidable, but I still think Obi-Wan probably still would be able to best him.
Well, considering how look at what he did to Maul.
That's what I'm saying. Like,
would that battle last like 7 seconds or something?
Exactly. And it's actually kind of regarded that like Obi-Wan is probably like he's one of the more powerful Jedi, honestly, but most people really don't see that because he's so defensive and he rather use diplomacy over aggression.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of people really don't think that he's really that powerful, but he actually is. The thing is that if they were to meet again.
Yeah, let's get to that because Darkseid was part of the question here is how could they or should they have them meet again that would still work so it wouldn't screw everything up?
If they met again, I could see it being like, okay, Obi-Wan is sneaking around, and I kind of came up with this scenario before. I could see Obi-Wan going on these little secret missions and kind of disrupting some stuff from the Empire. It's causing, kind of a headache for Palpatine. So then he kind of dispatches Vader to kind of figure out what's going on. So maybe one of these last, little ditch efforts, Vader does show up and Obi-Wan is there and he spots Obi-Wan.
Mm-hmm.
He still has that soft spot for Obi-Wan. They might kind of get into a nice little skirmish or whatever. And maybe there's something that makes Obi-Wan have to make the choice. Should I continue and fight Vader? Or do I need to get back to Tatooine and watch over Luke because I have a greater responsibility? So maybe that causes Obi-Wan to kind of flee again. And then it's like, okay, you know what? Or maybe they do come in contact again. And maybe Obi-Wan is like almost vanquished. Maybe Vader is more powerful than Obi-Wan at that time. And then now Obi-Wan is like, well, crap, I barely made it out of this thing. I still got to protect Luke. So let me get back to Tatooine where I belong until he's ready to take it on. So I could see that possibly if they were to do that.
Yeah, it's really tough, man. I mean, it's really hard to figure out like how could they really make them meet. See, the thing is, meeting again is one thing. I actually wouldn't mind that if they just met and had a little bit of a conversation, almost one of those, okay, if the next time I see you though, you're done. One of those kind of things.
Yeah.
Or, like you're saying, basically, he's executing Order 66. They run into each other, that kind of thing. He kind of lets them go. But my problem is they're talking about the battle of the century here.
Right.
And that's implying something insane.
Right.
And if that's the case, I mean, I can't help but think that is going to somehow ruin or at least diminish the whole conversation of episode 4, because one of the things about that whole scene in New Hope, much like a lot of things in the original trilogy, it's not really about the action, it's about the characters.
Well, there's also that line too that Vader utters. And once again, like I said, you could always make it refer back to Mustafar. However, Vader makes that statement, your powers are weak, old man. Mm-hmm. And it's kind of like, okay, like what happened? Like, it's kind of like, all right, I could see where it could be, well, the last time I met you, you were like one of the more powerful Jedi, but now in your old age, you've gotten weak because you haven't been using it and you haven't been, so I could see that.
You use it, you lose it.
Yeah. But then there's also the whole thing of like, yeah, they may have had one more battle or what have you. And let's say Vader lost that battle, to Obi-Wan. And maybe that's why he's like, when I left you, I was only about to learn. Now I'm the master, only master of evil, and then he's like, your powers are weak, so you can kind of see that's like, all right, you should not have come back. All those different lines, you can make it fit to say that, like, okay, they had another battle and Vader might have barely escaped, or there's a situation that, took them apart from each other, and they kind of look at each other in the distance, and they kind of do what you said, Eric, like, all right, you got away this time, but next time if you pop up, yeah, no, I'm Mr. Nice Guy,
Yeah. We'll have to see. Ronaldo's got a couple of things he wanted to say. He says, "Can we say that Vader appearing in the Kenobi show and Luke in the Mandalorian are examples of Lucasfilm being afraid of abandoning the Skywalkers?"
Not exactly. I wouldn't necessarily.
Yeah,
that.
I don't think so either. I think it's really more of a case of adding more context to a lot of these shows.
Yeah, because it's happening around that time. Like, it makes sense. There's no different than Rogue One. Like Vader didn't need to be in Rogue One, but it made sense for him to be in Rogue One.
Right. Well,
what I mean?
and again, you have to look at it, particularly with Luke and the Mandalorian. It's like, okay, and we've talked about this a million times.
Right.
Where who else? I mean, if Luke is actively trying to rebuild the Jedi Order, who else is going to answer this call? You're going to get Luke Skywalker's attention if you have Force users running around.
Not only that, but it's not just any Force user. I mean, this little baby is like super powerful for him to be like 50 years old.
Mm-hmm.
And then on top of that, now you're placing him on this stone that amplifies that.
Right.
So for someone who is so powerful in the Force as Luke Skywalker, and of course with him under the assumption that he's the last one, that's got to trigger something like, okay, well, who else is going to pop up? I mean, you could come up with some other Jedi, but I mean, he would make the most sense.
Sure, but let's go before that, though, because that could actually go into Ronaldo's point that you're writing this thing in order to bring in Luke. But let's just go back. They could have done something where they had no Force anything. But if you think about it, Palpatine, it was long established that he was having contingency plans and everything else.
Mm-hmm.
So it would stand to reason that in order for Palpatine to either come back or for the Empire to continue, you would need to have some sort of Force user responsible for this.
Mm-hmm.
And so consequently, it makes sense that the remnants of the Empire would be doing something along those lines. Now, it's true. You can come back at me, though, and say, well, you don't have to focus on that. You could focus on the remnants of the Empire that are just fighting for political capital or power or territory or whatever the case may be. And the Mandalorian's sort of like in between all this stuff. And that's true. And to a degree, even though you could actually say that Lucasfilm is having a little bit of a hard time getting away from the Force, you have to remember that a great deal of Star Wars is the Force.
Yeah.
I mean, it's pretty much a thing.
It's a Force-driven thing.
Yeah, right. And so Ronaldo goes on to say, they need to make stories in new eras. At some point, they won't be able to bring the same actors from the Skywalker Saga, so they need to move on. And that's true too. And that's one of the reasons why I made the argument at the beginning that the latest Thrawn book proves that you can have something that's not even taking place in the same part of the galaxy as anything that we've seen in Star Wars. And yet, this storyline, these characters, it feels like Star Wars. And of course, it gives us another insight into Thrawn too. Mm-hmm. And it just shows that Thrawn's probably the perfect example, but there are so many multifaceted, multidimensional characters that you can have in Star Wars that don't need to be Jedi or Sith or Empire or anything. I mean, I was actually so absorbed in the book, and to be honest, even though the cameo did make sense, I was a little bit disappointed. Because I'm like, oh, man, you had to tie it in, didn't you?
Well, I mean, I think that with Star Wars, that's part of the reason why people come for Star Wars is the Force. That's a big part of its
Well, I don't mind the Force. I was
in
talking about
Inception.
Anakin's appearance.
No. I mean, I'm just going back to Ronaldo's point about, or
Oh,
what you
okay.
were saying about
Yeah.
getting away from the Force and whatnot, because it is a very big part of Star Wars. So I think you kind of need that around. But there's other characters, like you said, we've developed with Rey. We've got stuff with Grogu. We've gotten things, like I said, with the High Republic. So I think you can still take the Force and still, utilize it in such a way where it creates its own world. But you can have it where, like I said, you have where different eras, different places in time, like Eric was saying, like, okay, the Outer Rim, you have the Acolyte. I mean, you got so much stuff. I mean, there's a lot of things that, match up, like even in the sequel trilogy, with Palpatine. Okay, we always knew that he had this whole plan of trying to come back, in some way, shape, or form. But the only way you're probably going to be able to do that is through the Force.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, using the Skywalker blood or something as powerful as the Skywalker. So they got Grogu. So that Grogu was kind of the way of making the sequel have a little more context or make a little bit more sense.
Oh, and
because
I don't doubt
see
that was done on purpose.
Exactly. So you can see how, like, the Mandalorian, and they said that, like, the Mandalorian was going to kind of fix some of the plot holes that was in the sequel trilogy to kind of at least smooth it out a little bit, So to that point, I could understand. But when you do that, then now you do have to consider, okay, well, Luke is the only Jedi running around. He's got to feel this, like, you know what I mean? Like, you just can't have something this powerful flying around and he's not going to pick up on that.
Yeah, see, and that's the reason why something like the High Republic is kind of the answer to that, because the easiest solution is just go before there's any Skywalkers. I mean, granted, they could really be cheesy and go, Anakin's great, but then again, he was born in the Force, right? So that lineage kind of ends,
right,
if you go backwards. So you can always go back, and that was what was so great about the Old Republic, was the fact that it went back so far. There was no danger of anybody falling for temptation to bring back those characters.
Any of it, because you can even bring back Yoda in the Old Republic.
Exactly. Another thing that I would love to see, now granted, in its original story form, you would have to bring back some of the original trilogy characters, but it would still be an interesting story nonetheless, and that's to bring the Yuuzhan Vong into it. Because here was an enemy that the Jedi couldn't just use the Force and vanquish like they've done several other times. Right. It's like, oh, these guys are basically immune to it. Now, the Grisk, who are enemies of the Chiss, who strangely did not make an appearance in this latest Thrawn book, but they made a heavy appearance in the Thrawn trilogy, and they've actually been popping up in various comics and a couple other novels. So I think that they're basically setting this particular group up to be the next, or at least one of the next villains, or, evil beings or something. And they're pretty fearsome. And they kind of remind me of the Yuuzhan Vong a little bit.
Okay. Yeah, I really do feel like it can go, a bunch of different places. But if I had to think of what would make Star Wars feel like Star Wars, I feel like you need some sort of Force user at some point. I think you're going to need some sort of kind of like Han Solo-ish kind of hotshot kind of person, just that doesn't have any special abilities except for just being good at what they do. And I mean, and it's always kind of been a team-oriented thing. That's another thing about Star Wars. It's always kind of been, the saga, at least from the saga standpoint. You always had Han, Luke, Leia, Chewie, Lando.
Yeah, it's like an ensemble.
I like a kind of ensemble cast. And then even in this sequel trilogy, you had Finn, Rey, Poe. So Rose eventually joined the crew kind of at the end. So you kind of always had that. And then, of course, even in the prequel trilogy, you still had those characters as well. So I think that that's kind of another thing that you need to kind of look at. Rebels the same way. That was a whole nother era, if you will. Once again, an ensemble cast. So I think if you kind of create another group of people that, you know, you might have somebody who's like the wisecracking, kind of sarcastic person, and they've even shown that in Mandalorian. You know, you had, you know, Din Djarin, you had Cara Dune, you have Grief Karga, you know, so that became like their own little ragtag group.
Yeah, Migs Mayfield.
Yep, he eventually kind of,
you know, there's like a loose group that's there that where you have different types of, and that's really where Star Wars is at its best, is when you have a bunch of different characters. I think that's the reason why Rebels caught on so much, because the crew of the Ghost, I mean, that perfectly fits into what you were saying.
Definitely. Ronaldo says, what would your reaction be if they tell a story 100 years in the future and the Skywalkers are still the protagonists, like Star Wars Legacy comics? Yeah, I mean,
well, I mean, I'll tell you this, and even though I think that the way that the Legend comics and all that stuff handled it was a little bit weird, it stands to reason. I mean, if you have a family as powerful and as important as the Skywalkers, 100 years is only like a generation or two. It would stand to reason that they would still be heavily involved.
Yeah, I mean, you would hear those stories passed down. I mean, it's no different than, like, you know, our actual real life families. You know, like, you know, some people have traced their roots back, you know, hundreds of years.
Well, even look at celebrity families, right? It's like you have
like the Kennedys or something like that. Or
sure, you know, political families, same thing. It's kind of like people that have influence that continues through their children, grandchildren, great grandchildren, and so on. Now you factor in Force users. Keep in mind that Anakin was born directly of the Force. So the Skywalkers basically are a little bit special because they could trace their lineage directly to the Force itself. So if there's somebody with Skywalker blood running around, you can bet that there's going to be some Force using involved. Now, here's what I think would be really cool is if they actually covered something, like you said, like 100 years in the future. Make it a Skywalker that rejects the Force and wants to just like lead a different kind of life. That could actually have some interesting storytelling, because now they have to fight the lineage of their family and, you know, the expectations that people would probably have, like, but you're a Skywalker, you know, that kind of thing.
Kind of like that whole Rocky thing with his son.
Yeah.
Like, you know, he went into business and it's like, well, why did you, you know, be like your dad? And it's like, I didn't want anything parts of that. You know, I just kind of wanted to make my own name.
You know, that would actually be an interesting spin. I mean, if they were going to continue on with the Skywalkers or whatever, that would be the way that they could do it and have it be compelling and interesting. Otherwise, I mean, there's certain things, because, you know, Jason Solo becoming Darth Caedus, and that I thought was kind of cool. In fact, I thought they were going to rip that off a little bit with Rey. I actually thought that Rey at one point, and we've talked about this too, I think it would have been very interesting if in episode 9, Rey had gone to the dark side and Ben had returned to the light. And now they're facing each other again, but this time
they're on the opposite.
They're on opposite sides. Rey is the bad guy, Ben's the good guy. And how that works, because now you would have somebody who was in the dark side saying, no, this isn't the way to go. I mean, I kind of thought that this was going to give me all this stuff, and it didn't, and it's a mistake. And then you have Rey, who's feeling the lineage now of being a Palpatine. I mean, that would have actually worked perfectly. And this newfound power, and hey, you know, I was a scavenger on Jakku, but look at what I am now. Right? Yeah. Ben saying, no, that's basically like it's a false thing. It's an illusion. That's what you think, but that's not really how it goes. That would have actually been super cool.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, we've definitely talked about that. And, you know, I think that would have been a great plot twist that no one really would have expected. And it'd have been interesting enough because you have one person who was trying to be so dark and resisting the light, now coming full circle and being on the opposite side, and and vice versa. However, the thing is about, I could see Rey going up to Kylo like, well, look, your grandfather was Darth Vader and, your uncle's Luke Skywalker, and you have all this power and you wasted it. Like you didn't take it all the way through. Whereas, my father or my grandfather's Palpatine. Like I can take, like, I know what I have, you know what I'm saying? And I'm going to embrace it. And, like,
my dad could beat up your dad kind of.
Yeah, basically.
But
right,
I mean, that's
exactly.
true. I mean, that
right would have been really compelling.
Great. Exactly. I mean, man, I can't even believe that. And that also would have been brave. People keep talking about
taking chances.
Yeah, taking chances in it and applauding Rian Johnson for the chances that he took that everybody liked. You want to talk about like taking some serious chances? That's how you take some chances.
Mm-hmm.
And then Ronaldo basically says, would we ever see the story of Rey's bloodline? I think not.
No, I don't think so. I think they're going to try to get far away from the sequel trilogy as possible.
Yeah, that kind of looks the way that they're going. In fact, this has been brought up in several different stories that you read on the internet all the time, but I don't think they're entirely wrong when they say that Favreau and Filoni are softly rebooting the sequels. Basically, what's going to end up happening is they're going to keep on with this storyline. They're going to make these little incremental changes that by the time, 5-10 years of stories come out, it's going to render the sequel trilogy somewhat null and void. And then they could actually remake it following that continuity if they wanted to. I'm trying to think of an example. There's a franchise that actually did that, but I don't remember what it was. But I mean, if you guys do, feel free to chat or comment it in. It was basically like they were going in one direction and then other stuff was coming out. And then over the years, it just changed the story. So they remade it and everybody was fine with it because you have a decade or two of stories under your belt that was leading up to that. So the original source material not really being all that relevant was fine. Everybody was fine with it because they were used to this. I mean, they did that with James Bond. Look at how many times they retold his stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they actually rebooted James Bond with Daniel Craig. People forget that, but they did. They basically was like, you know what? This is kind of a prequel. So his first couple of movies, it was really only the last movie or two that he did to where it catches up with maybe where Connery was.
Yeah, X-Men did it too.
X-Men, maybe that's the one I'm thinking of. But you're right, X-Men totally did it.
Like the whole Days of Future Past and
yes. First they started out with some individual movies that basically told the origin story of some individual characters. And then then they basically did the whole Days of Future Past and first something. It's like I'm getting so bad with this stuff. But the X-Men movies that they did where they basically rebooted the thing.
Mm-hmm.
You could do something like that with Star Wars.
Yeah, because they completely changed the whole Bryan Singer thing.
Sure.
Yeah.
And that wasn't even as much time. I mean, that was only within, like a few years that they did that. Now, granted, it's not a cultural icon like Star Wars. I mean,
right.
Because I'll be honest. I mean, I'm probably going to get a lot of crap for saying this, but I actually wouldn't care if they remade the original trilogy. Put Ewan McGregor in as the older Obi-Wan. Get, Alden Ehrenreich as Han Solo. Sebastian Stan as Luke Skywalker. Because, I mean, that one guy on YouTube that redid the Obi-Wan Vader battle in episode 4, but made it like a prequel thing. I mean, that was cool. I would like to see that. Because the thing is, it fits with the way that the stories have been told, even by Lucas himself. Because remember, one of the biggest issues back in the original trilogy was at the time, Lucas was like, oh yeah, lightsabers are really heavy. They're like broadswords. They're cumbersome and they're hard to swing. And then I remember Mark Hamill was calling him out on it after he saw the prequels, like, dude, where were our battles like this? I mean, you got these Jedi like all,
they're like ninjas.
yeah. And obviously lightsabers are, pardon the pun, very light, right? So, things can change. So we got some. I knew that was going to trigger stuff. So
you woke Dwight up.
I woke Dwight up. Reverse Ronaldo says the X-Men franchise didn't care at all about continuity. That's a good point. I will concede that point. However, the fact that people still enjoy it and they are really good movies proves that it can be done. Now, Dwight, of course, says, Eric, this is now on the fringe of blasphemy. And then Ronaldo says, at some point, they will reboot the original trilogy. It happens with every franchise. I'm going to give an example in a second. And then, of course, Dwight is formally introducing himself after the blasphemy comment. And it is. Look, I was there in 1977. Okay, I was like 6 years old. My dad took me to see it. It was brand new. It wasn't even called A New Hope when I saw the thing for the first time. So I get it. However, it depends on how they want to go with it. Because again, it doesn't actually ruin the original trilogy. You can go see it anytime you want. I mean, if you really want to think about it, Lucas already committed blasphemy with his special editions. There's a lot of people that prefer the theatrical versions of those films. Now, I kind of fall in the middle. So I like some of the things that they did in the special editions. I think that some of the stuff actually does enhance the story and gives it, again, a little more context. On the other hand, there was some stuff that I think was overdone and kind of ruined it.
Honestly, I think the only movie that really needed to be redone over was A New Hope.
Yeah, I could go with that.
Like Empire was fine the way it was. Definitely took something better out of them.
Yeah, it would be hard to remake Empire.
Yeah, and then
have it stand up.
Yeah, and then of course, with Return of the Jedi, most of that was fine too to me. I mean, honestly, if you were to get rid of anything, it would probably been the Ewoks, honestly. Replace them with Wookiees like he originally had it. Now that would have been, that would have been fine. But the whole changing the whole song at the end, I mean, all the things of the galaxy celebrating, that was cool. Like showing all the different planets celebrating. I thought that was cool.
That was.
But changing the song.
I know. I love the Yub Nub song, man. I mean, that was just, to me, it was a better song.
It was.
And they could have done the same thing. They could have put the whole galaxy-wide celebration. But here's something. Wizard of Oz. They made Oz the Great and Powerful. Now, there's mixed opinions of this movie, just like there are any other one. But I loved it. In fact, I remember thinking, like, man, if they would remake The Wizard of Oz with this cast, so The Wizard of Oz becomes a sequel now to the Oz the Great and Powerful, I'd be all about it. Because it was really cool. Now, again, it's, the original Wizard of Oz is a classic. I mean, just by its very nature, nothing's ever going to take it down. However, it's interesting because, number one, even with the source material, right? The Wizard of Oz doesn't have a whole lot in common with L. Frank Baum's original books. His books are actually fairly dark. So they could right some of the wrongs of the original trilogy by remaking it and do it with the younger actors that they want to continue on with, that you could do. Or another thing, and this is probably what I would prefer if I had a wish, wait until they perfect the whole de-aging thing. Kind of like what they did with Tarkin, kind of like what they did with Carrie Fisher, where, they had the other actress and they just slapped her face on and she goes, Hope. Mm-hmm. You perfect that to where you can, even if all the original trilogy actors are either like 90 years old or they're all dead, but yet you can go back and actually put Mark Hamill, Harrison Ford, and Carrie Fisher in a remake. You might question the ethics a little, but and there's a little bit of morbidity involved. But at the same time, I mean, that's how I would, if it were me, that's how I'd want it. Well,
yeah.
we'll probably get a lot of comments on the video, I'm sure.
Yes, Ronaldo says, I prefer the ending of the special edition episode 6 with the song than the original. Don't kill, please.
Well, I can understand why, though. See, the thing that's great about Star Wars, and, I'm just going to pat ourselves on the back a little bit. One of the reasons why I think that we provide a better community for Star Wars fans than any other YouTuber is because we're not, like, really fascist about any one particular opinion, even our own.
Mm-hmm.
Like, in the case of that song, I mean, I get it. It's not a bad song. I think it's actually kind of cool. I like it.
It's better than Nub Nub.
I kind of like the Yub Nub song. Just like, I'll tell you what else, though. I would agree to keep that ending song if you get rid of that terrible Size Noodles thing that they did.
Oh my God, that thing was so stupid.
And put the
I felt like I was watching like the Muppet Show or something like that.
It was awful. I mean, it actually took me out of the movie. Put the original version back in.
Yep.
I'll let you keep. We'll remove Yub Nub, but we got to put the original Size Noodles thing back in there.
Dwight also has a really good one. If they do reboot. Oh no, wait, Ronaldo. I'm sorry, it's Ronaldo first. He said,
but let's do this one. If they do reboot and the kiss is still there, I got questions. And that was based on Ronaldo saying, if they reboot the original trilogy, I wonder if Luke and Leia would still kiss.
Yeah. So yeah, if you put it back and the kiss is still there, yeah, I'm with Dwight. I've got some questions. I mean, I see you trying to be true to the thing, but that just
again, one of the reasons why you would actually redo it is in order to right some of these inconsistencies and the other general wrongs. And then Dwight says, yes, get rid of the extra Muppets. I mean, there are a lot of issues. You could literally fix a lot of the issues and make the continuity a little bit better and just make things. And again, I mean, I know what I'm saying when I say it because I was always one of those guys that says, hey, you can remake any movie in the universe, but don't touch the Star Wars movies. Now, I was saying that, though, back when those are really some of the only films, like, I don't even know if the prequels were out yet. Well, they might have been. But I have to say that the more supplemental material we're getting, the more series that we're getting, the more that you can really see what they can do, it would just be interesting. Even if they did it from a different perspective. So maybe you make a remake, but almost like in a Lost Stars kind of way.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe it's one of the stormtroopers that was present when Obi-Wan and Vader were battling. But when you show that from his perspective, now it's kind of like that really high intense duel. You do little things like that.
Right. Ronaldo says, if the kiss is there, I want to see Force Ghost Obi-Wan's reaction.
Yeah, right.
Oh man, that'd be hilarious. He'd be freaked out.
Well, I mean, the funny thing is, and of course, this all happened before Luke met Yoda. Mm-hmm. So I'm surprised, it's like, well, so was I, if you remember, too old to begin the training and all this other stuff. And finally, if Yoda just ended up being like, look, man, he's kissing his sister. I mean,
he's got some problems. He needs some therapy first.
Exactly. It's like, I just don't think this is going to work. It's kind of a little twisted.
Yeah, I mean, Luke is really kind of screwed up if you think about it, man, because he's kind of like, the parents that he knew, his aunt, uncle basically got slaughtered. He's running off with some old dude.
He comes back and they're basically like these hanging skeletons.
Yeah, they're hanging out of the thing to just like incinerate it. And then you run around with this old dude you just met 10 minutes ago. Looks like some weird homeless man. Then you're hopping on, you got this ship, you got this talking bear thing. And then, eventually, the guy the little homeless dude you're with gets cut in half. Now you're just flying around. And then next thing you know, he's appearing to you. He's talking to you. I mean, he's had like if I were Luke Skywalker, I would need some serious therapy
and drugs.
Yeah,
because
man.
I'd want to make the voices stop.
I know, right?
Then he's attacked by a wampa. He's like, basically like shoved inside of a tauntaun.
Right. Then he's hallucinating that his dead homeless friend is like basically talking to him. Then he's supposed to go to some mysterious planet. But before that happens, he kisses the chick that he likes, but then he finds out later on it's his sister.
Isn't that always the problem, though?
I will go to the dark. I mean, he's already on the dark side, if you ask me. I mean,
right?
Jesus Christ.
Yeah, right. I mean, I can just be like in that conversation with Vader, like, okay, so you think I'm the evil one? Let's review this.
Yeah, we're kind of neck and neck here, buddy. But yeah, man.
All I did was lie about being married, and I tried to save the people I loved.
Well, he did kill a bunch of kids, but
Oh, that was later. And, he was under duress. It was kind of an emotional moment. It's funny, that kid, the one that went up and said, Master Skywalker, what are we gonna, or whatever it was?
Yeah.
They actually had that kid on some podcast. He's like 30 now, but it was hilarious, man.
Oh wow.
I wish I remember what podcast it was, because it was a great interview, actually. Because he's still capitalizing on it, though. I mean, and that's what I'm saying. It's like these guys, you play like some out of focus character in the background, and you can suddenly go to conventions and make appearances and sign autographs.
Well, I've gotten on Dwight's dark side. He said I would not refer to Obi-Wan as a homeless friend. I mean, you gotta think about it in context, man. I mean, he's like all shabby. He's got these robes on. That's it. He's walking around, look like he's drunk.
The single greatest thing that anybody did was when in Family Guy they made Herbert play Obi-Wan, because that's, I mean, it's not that much of a stretch.
That whole Family Guy spoof of Star Wars, the original trilogy, especially the first one, was absolutely priceless.
The first one was the best one.
Yeah, the first one was like gold.
The first one is just got, I mean, it's just, because I rewatched them not too long ago. I mean, the first one is just, I mean, it's
Blue
just
Harvest,
one funny thing. Yeah, it's just one thing after another. I mean, the comedy in that was amazing, especially Stewie as Darth Vader.
Yeah, especially talking about the exhaust port.
Oh yeah, it's like whoa, wait a minute.
Yeah, you just going to ignore that? Like, can we put some plywood on this thing?
Or something.
Absolutely brilliant, man.
I mean, that's great, because that's actually what you would think. It's like, well, wait a minute, what weakness? What are you talking about? Oh, well, I mean, it's just the way that they did it was great.
Yeah, it was like so matter of fact. Oh man,
was it Robot Chicken though? Was that the one where the Imperial guys were like, okay, Vader thinks that he can choke people, but if he finds out he can, he might cut us with the lightsaber. So
you actually will be dead then.
Yeah. So we basically pretend, and people are putting on mustaches and
putting on a new uniform, and then come back as somebody else.
I mean that, and of course, Robot Chicken is.
Yeah, they got some. Their
Star Wars stuff is just comedy gold. But it just shows, though, that
these are all the stories you can tell.
Well, but I mean, there are other points of view, though. I mean, now those are the comedic ones. But Lost Stars is a good example. There's that whole book that's out from a certain point of view, which I have not read, but I've read some stuff from it and about it, and it's great. In fact, that was where we get confirmation, oddly enough, that that Yoda knew R2-D2 and remembered him. So there's all kinds of stuff that comes from that. So, I mean, absolutely. I just think it's insane when people think for some reason that Star Wars needs the Skywalkers. Now, granted, I can understand why people feel that that's the reality of it, because it does seem like Lucasfilm is a little bit hesitant, to say the least, to let go of these guys. But the reality is, when you read things like the Thrawn book, when you look at some of these other things that are coming out, or maybe when they focus on different characters, or they're going off, that the future of Star Wars is alive and well, and can certainly not only survive, but I would argue it could thrive without the Skywalkers.
Oh yeah, definitely. Like I said, Mandalorian, Rogue One, Rebels, all these other shows have proven that they can tell great stories. The only thing is, can you tell this great story and can you plan properly? If you can do that, you got great Star Wars.
And that's it. That is it right there. If you plan properly, you just have to plan it out. But let us know, of course, what you guys are thinking. You know, first of all, do you think that Star Wars really can survive without the Skywalkers? Or do you think that it would be difficult or impossible to really have something that feels like Star Wars without the Skywalkers? Let us know in the comments section below. And of course, you can always subscribe to our channel, like this video. Hit us up at Head to Head SW at Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. And, you know, make sure that you guys tune in next week. Well, actually, not really sure what we're going to cover on Monday, but tune in this Friday. Don't want to like ignore any opportunities here. This Friday at 8 o'clock, we'll be back on. Naturally, we're going to continue the Star Wars discussion. We hope you all can join us at that point. So until then, I'm Eric Vansel.
And I'm Daryl Sanders.
May the Force be with you.
Always.
Head to Head, a Star Wars podcast. Be sure to follow us on Twitter at HeadToHeadSW. Submit your questions for our next show. Visit our official website at headtoheadswpodcast.com. Until next time, may the Force be with you, always.